This week on Dig Me Out. With your hosts, Jason Zia and Tim Minichi.
Jay, we're back again with another episode thanks to our Dig Me Out Union on Patreon. You can help us make the next episode happen by joining us at dmounion.com or digmeoutunion.com. And this episode is a diamond episode. Insert some sort of diamond sound. What sound do diamonds make, Jay? I guess when you like have
chimes or xylophone or something.
Like when they're somebody's holding them in like a heist movie and there's like a handful of diamonds and like slide them out of the bag into their palm.
Oh, the clinky sound.
Yeah, the sound of fake diamonds, because I'm sure that they're not real diamonds in the movies. We've done a couple of these before. We've done No Doubt's Tragic Kingdom. We've done Pearl Jam's 10. We've done Alanis Morissette's Jagged Little Pill. And then unofficially, they weren't a part of our Diamond series, but we talked about them. Hootie and the Blowfish's Cracked Rear View, Nirvana's Nevermind. These are all albums which have sold at least 10 million copies from the 90s. There's a lot. We're going to get to quite a few of them over the period of this podcast. And we're going to try to figure out, did these albums stand the test of time? I mean, these are some of the biggest selling albums in the history of planet Earth, in the history of the known universe. These are the albums that have sold the most. If you lived on Saturn, you might have bought this record, although there's not really a, place to stand. It's a lot of gas. However, maybe you were on the moon. Maybe you're on Ganymede or Io. One of those places.
Your local radio station was probably playing this.
The signals were blasting out from planet Earth across the universe, and you were hearing these Diamond albums. So for this one, this is an album that has caused some conversation about love and hate in the Discord. Threats were made. Ultimatums were laid down that if we got to this, there would be discussion of it. So we're going to talk about the 1994 album Dookie by Green Day. Now, Jay, did you buy Dookie when it came out? Have you ever owned a Green Day album?
I own this album. I meant to go grab it out of my CD bin and show it to you, but I'm pretty sure I got it through BMG within the first year it was out. Maybe second single, third single-ish.
Yep.
You gotta pick something. You gotta pick whatever it was, 12 albums, or maybe they sent it to me and I never sent it back. I don't remember, but yeah, I had it. I listened to it, a little bit. It's been a long time. Even the singles, I think it's been quite some time since I've heard. Obviously, I think American Idiot and even the second album, I tend to hear, I don't know, I feel like I hear those singles more now than I hear stuff from this record, but I owned it. How about you?
Well, one thing, this was not their first album. They put out a number of releases before this. We'll get into it because they are, there's some there's some confusion, I think, maybe about what the releases are and people calling them first and second albums and that. I remember first seeing them on MTV. I think the video for Longview was probably the first time I saw them. I was like, well, this is weird and different. And they're censoring a word in this song. And I know we got it at the radio station. I know we played it. I probably bought the CD used. And then I remember the next album, Insomniac, I did buy that when it came out because I enjoyed this record quite a bit when I got it. And this was around the time when you were seeing singles pop up, not just from albums, but you were seeing songs getting played on the radio or on MTV. They were also from soundtracks. And I believe that one of the songs that was recorded for this album, but was actually on a soundtrack, was Jar, which was on the Angus soundtrack, I think. And that we played that at the radio station too. Like we got that soundtrack, and because those bands were popular, a lot of them were on the Angus soundtrack, which people, if you don't know, that's one of sort of like the forgotten teen movies of the 90s. It's not as well known as like Empire Records or Can't Hardly Wait. Some of those out, She's All That. But Angus is a lot of fun, and it has an incredible soundtrack. It has like Green Day, like I mentioned, Jar, that song. It has a song by Weezer called "You Gave Your Love to Me Softly," which was, I believe, a outtake from their Blue album, but didn't make it onto the record. There's a couple of Ash songs, Smoking Popes, Goo Goo Dolls, The Muffs, Love Spit Love, just to name a few. So great soundtrack. People should check that out. After Insomniac, I think I don't think I picked up Nimrod. I think by that point I was like, okay, I kind of get what this band's doing. They're just kind of, I didn't feel like I needed more beyond the singles. Like Nimrod had Hitchin' a Ride and Good Riddance. Good Riddance became like the slow dance prom song. Yeah. What's interesting is that it was written during the time of Dookie.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
And they just didn't finish it. So that could have been like another huge single on this record. So it didn't make Insomniac because I guess they wanted to make like a harder album with Insomniac, so they didn't include it. And then it ended up on Nimrod. And it should be mentioned that all of these records are produced by Rob Cavallo, and I'll get into why he's important to the band and also to just sort of the pop punk sound of the 90s. So I'm not going to do like a deep dive on the history of Green Day because they're a very well-known band. For people who don't know, they're from Rodeo, California. The primary members for the entire history of the band have been Billie Joe Armstrong, Mike Dirnt, and Tre Cool. They did, when they were in high school, they started when they were 15. They did have a different drummer. His name was Raj Punjabi. And then Mike Dirnt was actually the guitar player, and they had a different bass player. Raj left, the guitar player left, Mike Dirnt moved to bass, and so then they had a different drummer, and then that drummer left, and he was replaced by Tre Cool. So basically the majority of the changes happened before they got any big or anything like that. But on some of their early recordings, they have a different drummer. It's not Tre Cool. So they are most famously associated with like Berkeley, California, and the Gilman Street Club, which was the punk club in the Bay Area in the 80s and 90s. And they recorded. So this is where where the confusion I think comes in with some people. So their first release was an EP in 1989. This is what people don't know. 1989, 1,000 Hours was the name of the EP. And it concluded 4 songs. And this is with John Kiffmeyer on bass. Or excuse me, on drums. And it's Billie Joe Armstrong and Mike Dirnt. So they released that. Then the next year they release, I say an EP, essentially a 7-inch. Like these songs were so short that they fit 2 songs on each side of a 7-inch. Same thing with their next EP. It's essentially a 4-song 7-inch. And same lineup: Billie Joe Armstrong, Mike Dirnt, John Kiffmeyer. And then they released another EP, another 7-inch. That was under the names. They were originally called Blood Rage in high school. Then they changed that to Sweet Children. And then they changed that to Green Day because there was another band that had Sweet in the name in the area, and they didn't want to get confused. they chose Green Day because I guess one of the slang terms in the Bay Area was if you were just going to smoke pot all day, you're going to have a green day. And
Hmm.
Joe Armstrong has said they have regretted that name ever since. But it's,
Oh wow. Okay.
yeah,
I guess I never thought about it that hard.
I never did either. And then we get to their first record, 39/Smooth, which came out in April of 1990. That it included a bunch of songs that were on the 7 inches, and it was released on Lookout Records. Now, Lookout Records is there's a book. I don't know if people have read it, but it's an interesting book. Was a Bay Area record label that existed from 1987 to 2012. Was run by Larry Livermore. A lot of punk bands that people know and a lot of punk bands that people don't know have been on that label, like the Groovy Ghoulies, Screeching Weasel, Born Against. Who else is on there? Fuel, but not the Fuel you're thinking of. The Queers, the Zero Boys, Pansy Division, Operation Ivy, Neurosis, Mr. T Experience, Ted Leo and the Pharmacists were on Lookout for a period of time. Small Brown Bike, Gaza Strippers, just tons. Rancid. I could just keep naming bands, but a ton of bands on Lookout that did 7 inches, EPs, what have you. So they released that first album in April of 1990. It doesn't do anything. There's no chart history for that record. The next year, they release Kerplunk. That's 1991, December of 91. This is the album that features Tre Cool on one track, and then on most of the tracks, John Kiffmeyer plays on like 3 tracks. And this is where you get Welcome to Paradise, which would be re-recorded for Dookie. They weren't happy with the way that it came out for Kerplunk. So they re-recorded it later and they actually re-recorded a number of songs, but that was the only one they were happy with the re-recording. Because again, they were not dealing with, when they were on Lookout, big budgets. They were often going in over a weekend to record another entire album. They had like 3 days to make a record. So, first day you're setting up, you're getting all your gear set up, getting your tunes, everything tuned in. You're recording like half the album. Next day you go in, you record like half the album, and then the third day you mix it and you're done.
Yep.
It's very quick recording experiences. So it ends up selling like 30,000 copies, which of course, early 90s, 92, 93, gets the attention of major labels. Of course, that's going to happen. And there was a lot of like them getting wined and dined, and they rejected all of it because they're like, we're a punk band from the Bay Area. We don't sign to major labels. We're none of these people make any sense for us to sign with. And Billie Joe Armstrong, and they're still teenagers at this point. Like they're like 18, 19 years old. Mike Dirnt or Tre Cool was not even old, or yeah, I think the 2 of them were 21, and then Tre Cool was still like 19 or 20 because he couldn't drink when they would go out.
Right.
Or wasn't supposed to. So they ended up meeting Rob Cavallo, who was an A&R guy and a producer at Reprise Records. And he said, I just want to watch you guys play. Like, goes to their practice space. They ended up not playing any of their songs. They're like, we're just going to do a bunch of Beatles songs. And he was like, cool. And they did like punked up versions of a bunch of Beatles songs. And he's like, can I join you guys? And he knew all the songs that they were playing. So he played like second guitar. And they said, all right, you're cool. We'll sign with you. So they signed the Reprise Records. It was a 6-album deal. And they got total control over all of their previous recordings. So they could re-release them themselves.
Nice. Yep.
They worked out a deal with Lookout. That ended up pushing Kerplunk from 30,000 to 1 million in sales eventually, because people, when Dookie broke, people went, oh, what's the previous albums? And then they ran back, and Kerplunk all of a sudden, shoots up. so they recorded Dookie, and like I said, they had done albums in 3 days, so they were like kind of struggling to deal with the studio. Like they had never really dialed in guitar tones before. They just plugged in whatever they played live. And he's like, no, we're gonna like really get you guys sounding good. Like I'm not gonna shave off the sharp edges. I'm just going to get it so it sounds good. Because when they gave them the first 4 demos for the album, he said, yeah, you guys have songs. Like we just got to find the sound for them. So they spent a day getting drunk at a Mexican restaurant, just talking about what they wanted to do. Like, how do we want this record to sound? And then they went down the street to Fantasy Records and Fantasy Studios, excuse me, and started recording, dialing in tones, like actually taking time. Jerry Finn was there, the famous producer, working with them. And it took 2 days to just rip through a bunch of these tracks. Like they didn't intend to do it that fast, but they knew these songs so well. Most of Billie Joe Armstrong's lyric or vocal takes are 1 take.
Wow.
Yeah. He did those in 2 days. Like they were moving really quick through this record. Initially, the band wanted a very dry recording sound. They said, listen to the, Never Mind the Bullocks by the Sex Pistols. Listen to Black Sabbath. Like this is what we want. They mixed it and then they heard it and they go, oh, this isn't good. Like it's too dry.
Yeah.
So they remixed it. And then they realized that a couple of the songs, Chump and Longview, had tape hiss in them. So they had to go to a different studio and they re-recorded those. And that's when they did a demo of Good Riddance, Time of Your Life. And they re-recorded Welcome to Paradise, re-recorded 2000 Light Years Away, re-recorded Christy Road from previous albums. But then Welcome to Paradise was the only one to make it. The album was released in February of 1994, which is funny because like when I think of this record, this sounds like a summer record to me. Like this sounds like bright and I don't know, energetic.
Yeah.
Releasing it in February seems odd to me. I don't know why, but that's when it came out, and it was like one of those slow builds. It didn't blow up with the first single, which was Longview, but it did okay. So when they were in the pre-production, or sorry, the pre-promotion meetings with the label, Rob Cavallo was like, I really think you guys, like, you sold 30,000 on your own. I think we could do 200,000 with a national push. And Tre Cool was like, why don't we do 500,000? And they were like, well, let's not go crazy. They only shipped 6,000 CDs for the first week.
Wow.
And they immediately sold out. So they actually had a production issue because they sold out so quickly. They didn't have CDs ready to go. And
so you're not going to find this in the cutout bin.
No, not immediately, at least. Sorry, 9,000, not 6,000. They sold out 9,000 CDs in the first week. They had to immediately start pumping up sales, and it went to the Billboard 200 at 127. So at this point, Reprise goes, oh, we have something here. They book them on Late Night with Conan O'Brien, Jon Stewart, 120 minutes, all that, those sorts of things. Then as they're pushing out more copies, it starts charting in Germany. It starts charting in Sweden, Australia, Canada, and they're like, holy shit. Like this is crazy. It sold 500,000 copies by June. So you release it in February and you got 500,000. Like that was their wild goal, was to hit. Yeah. They wanted 200,000. They got 500,000 in like 6 months. In August, they released Basket Case as the second single, which I remember that video. That them in the like insane asylum.
I went to a shrink to analyze my dreams. She says it's like a sex that's bringing me down. I went to a whore. He said my life's a bore.
Longview gets nominated for an MTV Music Award, and then the label wanted to do "Welcome to Paradise" as the third single, and Billie Joe Armstrong said, "No, that's a song from our punk days, and like if we put that out as a single, we are essentially shitting on that era." And they had already been banned from the Gilman Street Club for selling, quote unquote, selling out. They told them to never come back, which they ended up doing in 2015 as a benefit show. But then they get booked to play Saturday Night Live. They put out When I Come Around as another single. They get nominated for multiple Grammys, and they win Best Hard Rock Performance and Best Rock Performance by a Duo or Group with Vocal. I think those are the two, yeah. And then When I Come Around, like, shot up the charts. Just every single of theirs did incredibly well. They sold 10 million by 1999 and 20 million by 2014. So think about that. Between 1999 and 2014, they sold 10 million copies. And that's 5 years, and between 5 and 15 years after the record's released. Or 10 years, 5 and 10 years after the record was released. Or sorry, 15. Whatever. But that's insane to sell that many copies so long after.
And they were releasing successful records in that time period too. So yeah.
Yep. The reviews at the time were, I was shocked. I didn't realize they were universally well received. Which I thought for some reason like there was a backlash against them. But it wasn't. There wasn't. And this combined, the Offspring Smash was released in April. So you had this Green Day Dookie in February, Smash in April. At that point, the record labels go, oh, well, shit, we got to start signing all these California punk bands. Yeah. So that's when you get like Rancid gets signed, NOFX gets signed. All of these bands from that era or that area get on the radar of people and are getting swooped up by major labels. So that's sort of I guess you'd say the legacy of this period of time and of this band, this label. And then eventually at some point we'll get to Smash. But because it's not a diamond album, that's a like 6 million seller. But that was an independent release, and it's still one of the best-selling independent released albums of all time because it was released by Epitaph, who has no connection to any major labels. And now, of course, it's on. Dookie is on like the top 1001 albums you have to hear before you die, and greatest albums of the 90s, and all those sorts of things. And a ton of bands have cited them as influences from, Sum 41 to Blink 182 and all sorts of. Even Lady Gaga was like said that Dookie was an important album. It was like the first album she bought as a kid with her own money.
Yeah.
So that's sort of the legacy of this record. Now they would go on obviously to continue up until this day to continue putting out records. Insomniac followed shortly after. That was 1995. So the next year they put out Insomniac. That went double platinum. And then Nimrod was released in 97, Warning in 2000. In 2000, American Idiot in 2004, 21st Century Breakdown in 2009, Uno, Dos, and Tre, which were like their Kiss solo albums essentially, in 2012. Revolution Radio 2016, Father of All Mother Effers in 2020, and Saviors this year in 2024. So, and then they've done stuff outside of the band. Billie Joe Armstrong has a side project called Pinhead Gunpowder with members of various Bay Area punk bands, and there's Foxborough Hot Tubs, which is not involved with my street. It just has members of various bands. So that's the history of primarily this album, but also of the band. Comments. Let me take a drink because that was a lot of talking on my part.
I thought you weren't going to do much on history, and then
I did. I'm sorry.
Boom!
This is
just drop the hammer.
There's a lot, and the album cover itself, you could spend an entire episode because there's a lot of stuff hidden in that album cover, which they specifically sought. Like the record label wanted to put a picture of them on the album cover because you want to show off, right? And they were like, no, we're not that kind of band.
Well, they are now, but at the time they weren't.
Sure. But they said there's an artist that we like. He had done art for people in the Bay Area for their albums. And they said, we want to make like a visual representation of what it's like to be in the Bay Area, not just like physically, but like mentally and like the music that we listen to. So there's all sorts of hidden allusions to things in the album cover. There's like Patti Smith is on the cover. There's Angus Young is on the cover of AC/DC. There's a reference to Black Sabbath's debut. There's a reference to Huey P. Newton from the Black Panther Party. The Sather Tower, which is in the University of California, Berkeley. There's oil refineries because they're in Rodeo, California, where they're from. Just all sorts of like little hidden things in there. And there's also a great Lego version of that. If you have not seen it, go online and you can Google Lego Dookie, which they wanted to call the album Liquid Dookie because that's what they call diarrhea. And the label was like, yeah,
maybe it's touch subtler.
Let's shorten that down to just Dookie.
It's a little disappointing. So I'm listening to the 30th anniversary deluxe edition on streaming, and they changed the album art, at least on streaming, to be just, the word Dookie and a little pile of Dookie. Like I hope, I have never seen the print version of this, but I would hope the print version would enhance the cover you're talking about because it has so many cool details. And
well, from what I've seen, there is an expanded artwork, which is like a poster size and it incorporates a whole bunch more around the edges.
I hope
so that might have been included.
Yeah, I would hope.
It's funny though, because when I look at the Lego version, I can see the parts and I'm like, I know what that part is. I know what that, because I'm a Lego nerd. I'm like, oh, that was an interesting use of that element.
At least on streaming though, it's kind of disappointing because for at least on Apple Music, the 30th anniversary edition is the one that shows up if you just choose like show me all their albums.
Yeah.
You have to do a specific search for just Dookie to be able to find the original. So if you're just browsing Green Day and generally listening to them, you probably don't come across the old album cover anymore.
Yeah, sadly.
And it does a good job of like visualizing what this band sounds like at the time. Yeah.
I think they might do that because, to be honest, most people are not looking at the album artwork anymore. So you just want the letters, the type to be big enough for people to see. But you lose that.
Sucks.
That element of it. So comments over at our Patreon. We'll get to the poll results at the end. Were the album better EP, decent single? Here are the comments. Scott Hallgrim, anyone who doesn't vote Were the album has some splaining to do. Josh Ballard, still their best album by a mile. Darren Leach said Insomniac is a fine follow-up given how good Dookie is and how well it's sold. It's a perfect album beginning to end, and even half the album is about even if half the album is about masturbation. Willie Dillon said, I'm not a huge Green Day fan, but I don't dislike them. Listening to the album now, I realize I don't recognize any of the songs other than what was played on the radio, and I have to say that the album tracks really aren't as interesting. They're not bad, just not as memorable for me. Better EP. Keith Preston said, I really enjoy this album and still break it out from time to time. The Clash and Stiff Fingers are all over Dookie, but that's not a bad thing. It's definitely odd that despite its success, this was the band's last old school UK style punk record before shifting to a heavier traditional alternative radio sound. Either way, this one was a worthy album. And Billie Joe Armstrong did address that. He said, because, there are songs on here that aren't punk length. They're not punk songs per se. And he said, we can do whatever we want. Like, we're not beholden to we might have grown up punks, but we're allowed to grow.
Yeah.
Which I think for him at the time was, again, he's like 21. That's
right.
pretty mature to understand that. And then also, like, you're not going to have much of a career if you just repeat yourself over and over again.
Right.
Only AC/DC can do that.
Yeah, there's one caveat there.
Yeah. Kyle Bittner said, top to bottom, this is a perfect pop punk album. It's fun, funny, fast, and doesn't overstay its welcome. The fact that they weren't self-indulgent as they came to be helps. We're the album. Darren Lehman, fantastic album. I got it on vinyl for Christmas. I got a thing going on there. Christmas. Nothing sums up being a bored teenager in the 90s, being stuck at home better than this album. The deep cuts are excellent, too. Ian McIver. You ready?
Here we go.
It's no secret in the DMO union that Green Day is my most hated band of the 90s, with this album as a focal point.
The most hated?
I feel like that is a very... I feel like there's albums worthy of more derision than this record. If you're not a fan, but here's what he said: I first became aware of Green Day
in the '90s to hate.
I know. I first became aware of Green Day in the summer of 1994 while on course to get my pilot's license. The student way to go, Bruce Dickinson. The student partnered with me for my instructor would often wear a Dookie shirt. After completing the course and returning home, I noticed a friend had the album. And curiosity got the better of me. I was immediately disappointed and thought nothing of the album. But then I realized how many other classmates at school loved them. And with heavy rotation on radio for the singles, I was questioning why. I love bands like The Clash and Ramones, and I enjoyed stuff that followed, like Offspring. Green Day has just never clicked for me. There was a resurgence punk in 1994, which we've discussed, after the death of Kurt Cobain. And the industry was looking for the next big thing sound. And Green Day benefited from coming out first in the year. Which is true. Although, again, if you read some interviews with Billie Joe Armstrong, he said they were very conscious of the fact that they did not want to be the next Nirvana. Like they did not want to be turned into an alternative band because they knew it was that would doom them. Like they said, we have to stick to what we do, and if that means we sell 30,000 copies, we sell 30,000 copies. But he did not want to like make a grunge record. So he says, this is where he gets into it. They're all flash and no substance. I wonder if they would have had the same impact if they followed other albums later in the year. We can discuss that. Struggling to re-listen to the album, I am left to conclude that Green Day definitely punches above their weight class. The singles are obvious, and the rest of the album is just there to fill the CD. Almost like the rest of the career, the big moments benefited from timing. American Idiot being the other, benefiting from the political situation of the day. And then they coast on their name and reputation from those moments afterwards. Maybe it's just me, and the SoCal punk scene doesn't appeal to me, as most of the punk bands I listen to are from the UK and New York City scenes and tend to be a different generation. I didn't waste time to copy the album to cassette in 1994, and if it wasn't for streaming, I wouldn't have bothered to find a download, but that isn't an option, so decent single will do. It says from a RNG will do. I don't know what that RNG means. He'll tell me.
They're not SoCal though. They're NorCal.
Yeah, that is true. They're NorCal. He just doesn't like California punk.
I see.
I guess.
Yeah. Got it.
No Black Flag or Operation Ivy for Ian. There we go. Those are our comments. As I mentioned, I'll share the poll results when we share our final decision at the end of where the album better be EP. So Jay, you've heard this record. I've heard this record. You said that, the singles popped.
Yep.
Looking back now, it's been, how long has it been? 30 years, Jay.
Ooh. Ouch.
I know. It's been 30 years.
Oh, that hurt.
Like a CD slicing into your skin. What works for you on Dookie by Green Day?
I think at the time it popped because it was so crisp and melodic and hooky. And then there was something else about it I don't think I realized at the time that I realize now that grabbed me or seemed different. And what I've realized now as I analyze the record is I think what separates them, at least to my ears, is just how tight and solid the performances are for the type of music they're playing. So, and I think that gives them a very unique sound. So taking that punk background, keeping that energy, even some of the, a lot of the playing style, drumming wise, guitar wise, but really sharpening it so that it's very tight and precise. Really, I think at the time connected with me, but now as I analyze it, I'm realizing, I think more analytically, that's why it stood out and why it kept my interest more than a lot of the other bands at the time, or even before that. I'm not a huge punk fan. There's some bands I like The Clash a lot. There's some bands here and there that get lumped in the genre that I enjoy, but there's a lot of it that I never really connected with. And I think a lot of that has to do with the way that they're able to deliver it is full, and it feels like thicker and tighter and punchier. Starting with the bass, really interesting bass parts. They help create the loud, soft dynamic that a lot of bands did in the 90s, but they're doing it on this record more with, instead of the guitars like being clean in the verse or picking out notes, they introduce those dynamics through the bass holding on a groove in the intro or in the verse. Longview is a great example of that. So that then when the guitars come in, or in the case of it's basket case where the drums come in, you get this big loud dynamic. So I think they're playing with how to use bass in a very sophisticated way that I think is really interesting in terms of dynamics. It also keeps the songs interesting on repeated listens, because he's pretty busy. If you really listen to what he's doing, he's adding a lot of accent notes. There's some cool little either intros or little sections where the bass pops. It just stood out to me. It was like, oh, okay, this is very much a rhythm oriented band. The bass and the drums, the kick drum specifically, are just locked together. So, the drums can play these kind of like skipping fast punk energy beats, but because the bass is so locked in, it doesn't ever sound thin, right? It always sounds big and energetic and tight, and there's a pocket there. Even the fills, which are to my ears kind of coming out of that punk school, in other bands, when I hear drummers, punk drummers do those fills, there's just a lack of precision to it. So it kind of sounds a little flat and thin, but there's something about like he's hitting these super fast tom rolls all over the place. And when he hits them, it's like every note is like, just delivered with emphasis and precision. And so like every one of those fills has some meaning to it. It's not just like flying by. Yeah, it's fast, but it still carries weight, which I think is, again, important for distinguishing this band and kind of delivering these songs with I think a heft that my ears don't always hear in the genre. Obviously they're going for something more pop oriented, I think, with the production difference in this album. With the previous albums, you can hear all that. I think the last thing, performance wise, that really stood out to me is the really subtle but effective use of harmonies on here. It really helps emphasize, like, oh, here's the hook, here's the chorus, but it's never like too overly sugary. You know, sometimes if you overdo the harmonies, it becomes, you know, too power pop and too glossy. And they do a really good job of kind of staying true to this edgy punk energy, but also adding enough harmonies in that it makes it melodic and accessible, and your ears can find the hooks easier. So yeah, I think, you know, what works for me now, and probably what separates this from a lot of the bands that came before them and after, is just the performance. These are super tight, well crafted songs, but the performances around them, it seems like every note is really thoroughly considered. I get the sense that they worked the shit out of these songs, probably played them to death, but didn't lose the energy of them, which is really hard to do. So yeah, I think it's kind of an overlooked maybe performance record in a lot of ways, because because the songs are so strong, or at least the singles. So that's what stood out to me. What works for you?
Upon first re-listen, because obviously I've listened to this record since I owned it, one of the things that I started paying attention to was how quickly they get to the choruses. In almost every instance, and there's a couple where they don't, it's within 30 seconds that they get to the chorus, or at least the pre-chorus, so you know the chorus is about to hit. There are a couple instances where they don't, and it's usually because, like on the closing track before the hidden track, F.O.D, it kind of fakes you out if you think you're getting an acoustic song, and then it takes a while for the band to actually come in.
When it's all said and done, it's real and it's been fun, but was it all real fun? Let's do the bridge we torched 2,000 times before. This time we'll blast it all to hell. I've felt this burning in my guts now for so long. My belly's aching now to say. You just are wrong. I can't explain it 'cause I think you suck. I'll take, get right, and tell it, get the fuck off.
On a couple other songs, it's just a few instances where they do a double verse, where you think they're going to go to the chorus and they circle back around and do another, or you think they're going to get to the chorus and they do another verse. That's rare. This is a 40-minute album with essentially 15 songs when you add the hidden track. 3 songs in a row are under 2 minutes on the back end. So even if you're like sort of getting fatigued, you're going to get through those songs so fast.
Yeah,
that they're just like, here, we know it's the back end of the album. Here's some really fast songs to get you through. And what I really appreciated about this record is kind of what Billie Joe Armstrong was getting to, is like, there are punk songs on this, Having a Blast, Sassafras Roots. You know, there are songs that sound like punk songs. They have that vibe, that beat. But then they were able to do things that are in the popish end of power pop. Still, you know, which has it's, I mean, I don't know why that wasn't a single. That could have been a single.
I feel like it was. I mean, I remember that song. I mean, obviously I had the record, but there were some songs in here revisiting. I was like, I don't remember this one. That was definitely one I remember.
Yeah, it wasn't released as an official single, but I feel like radio stations played it anyways. So
Yeah,
the only singles that they supported with videos were Longview, Basket Case, and When I Come Around. Welcome to Paradise was released as a single, but the band refused to do a video for it, or like support it officially, I guess. But I know She got played.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things I realized in a sort of a big picture, broader picture sense is that, you know, punk had been around at this point for, I guess you'd say 15 years, because you're saying like late 70s, proto punk with Iggy and the Stooges and MC5 and that kind of stuff in the early 70s, late 60s, early 70s, and then punk actually into the mid 70s and going forward. To me, the fact that you have a band that is clearly coming out of a specific punk scene, but that also appreciates stuff like Patti Smith and Black Sabbath. Their worldview wasn't just punk. So when you hear these songs and you hear these melodies, they're not just like straight up punk melodies. If there are some songs that he's, you know, this is clearly a punk song. But when you get to When I Come Around, I mean, that's essentially a ballad for them at that tempo.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is there is just a natural accumulation of influences. Like a band from 1955 is not going to have an accumulation of influences the same way, or a band from 1975, the same way the band from, you know, recording an album in 1993 has got so much music to listen to before them that, yeah, it's going to stray from pure punk. They're going to hear things and they're going to integrate things. So when you hear this, you go, oh, I mean, I hear some of the Jam, some of that, you know, Paul Weller-esque melodies and harmonies, like you said, subtle harmonies, not over the top. Oftentimes they're used just in bits and pieces during verses, just to accent certain lines. Yeah. And again, the bass playing, like you mentioned, is so much more interesting. I mean, a lot of the records he's playing root notes and he's sticking to what, you know, needs to happen. Longview, I mean, that's a bass-driven song. That is a great bass line. When I Come Around, that could be a very simple bass line, but when you listen to it, he's doing all sorts of like pull-offs and things. Like it has a rhythm to it. It has melody in the bass line that a lesser band would just play root notes, and you wouldn't get all of those things.
I heard it all before. Satan knocked at my door. I'm a loser and the user, so it's only no accuser to try and slag me down because I know you're right. So go do what you like. Make sure you do it wise. You may find out that yourself don't think nothing ruins everything. You can't go forcing something if it's just not right. No time to search the world around. 'Cause you know where I'll be found when I come around.
So I think I didn't necessarily pick up at it at the time because I didn't have the same vocabulary and the same, you know, overall depth of knowledge. But there's a lot more. I'm not going to say complexity because this isn't a complex album, but there's more thoughtfulness in the playing than I appreciated. And then the fact that it all sounds good. This is sort of an ideal sound for me in terms of the guitars sound big, but not overly distorted and not overly thin, or, oh, you know, they're not undercooked, they're not thin, they're not metallic sounding. They just sound like whatever he's playing. I don't know what he's playing, to be honest, guitar wise, what his setup is, and I'm sure it's changed over the years. He could be playing, you know, a beat up Strat or something.
I mean, he was playing a Strat in most of the videos, I think.
Okay, yeah, I mean,
at this time,
that sounds perfectly reasonable.
Although there was an era, it was either this album or the next one, where he started playing a Les Paul Jr.
Oh yeah, that's right. I remember seeing that.
But it's a very like tight, got a good amount of gain on it. You know, it's a very like hard rock sounding guitar, not necessarily a punk sounding guitar tone. Like it's a nice full mid-range tight guitar tone.
I mean, when you hear that guitar that opens Welcome to Paradise, it is you can it's clear. It's not there's not a lot of high end. There's not
Yep.
too much. It's not, overly bassy like a stoner rock record or something like that. Like it's right where you want it to be in terms of sound for this type of band. And there is some doubling that goes on, but it's fairly minimal. If the double happens, it's just to thicken up the guitar tone. It's not like he is adding a second guitar line to every song. It's more just we're going to fatten up the tone, which I can respect that. That's a smart move to make. But I think the overall appreciation that I have for this record is just how catchy it is. The people who said that they didn't think that the album tracks, are as strong as the singles, sure, I think that's to be expected. I don't expect if they had written 12 Basket Cases, you'd be talking about the greatest album of all time. I mean, that's impossible. You could not write that many insanely catchy songs. But again, like Burnout and Having a Blast and a lot of these songs are really, really catchy, and they weren't official singles, even though we heard them. Do need to talk a little bit about the lyrical content because it was brought up. There is a lot of songs about uh, personal pleasure. Let's put it that way. I guess it came from reading that for a while Billie Joe Armstrong lived alone in an apartment, and it was in a part of California where there was like nothing to do, and he would literally just like play music and go home, and it was a super cheap apartment, so he didn't have to have a job at this point, and he would just like smoke pot and masturbate all day, and like,
Good Lord.
and he was bored, like he was just bored by it. And I think that that's an interesting take. Also, the fact that it's a very subtle thing, but in Basket Case, when which again is a really well arranged song,
Yeah.
the fact that the band doesn't come in until the back half of the chorus,
Yep.
is such a good move. But the second verse, when he goes, "I went to a shrink to analyze my dreams," he says it's lack of sex that's bringing me down, which, by the way, I have not looked up those lyrics in 20, 30 years, and I still know what the lyrics are. And he says, "I went to a whore. He said my life's a bore." Now, he says he, not she. If you're talking about a prostitute, you would think usually you would say she. That would be the male thing to do. He says he, and he said in an interview, like he was struggling with his identity at this time. Like he was in his teens, he was all over the place. He never acted on anything, but he was like, I didn't really know where I belonged on the spectrum. And so when he was writing from those things, he was actually writing from his own sort of perspective of like, I don't know where I belong. Like I'm curious if like Billie Joe Armstrong's sort of lack of willingness to be a dude all the time and to be a little bit more empathetic, I guess, and be more open-minded, both with his lyrical content and his like worldview, actually sort of separated them from that scene, because like Maximum Rock and Roll, the punk fan scene, like, disavowed them when this happened. And there's a lot of sort of, they were never a political band up until American Idiot, but they definitely talked about social issues in their own way, which I never really thought about. I just thought it was about teens complaining and being bored and like blah 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 blah. But he's actually coming across, or not coming across, but he was saying some things that were not being said, which is interesting. And also that Basket Case is dealing with anxiety, which is not something that people sang about. And he was like, having panic attacks, and it was years later where he actually got like medically diagnosed with panic disorder and stuff like that. But I feel like
I remember at the time that feeling like lyrically, I mean, I didn't analyze the lyrics in great detail, but it felt like it kind of fit, but it was different. Like it had an angst to it, but it was a different kind of angst than maybe we had heard the last couple of years. There was a little bit of a sense of humor to it that came through. it opened the door to, I think, a lot of other bands. That Blink-182 comes to mind. It started to really lean into this, minus the political stuff. Obviously, I think, Green Day continues to play with social and political themes that maybe some of these other bands that were more pop oriented, punk, didn't.
Right. And it's interesting that they have garnered, a mainstream audience for so long and moved into politics. Usually if you're trying to gain a mainstream audience and become more popular, you would move away from politics because that is divisive. Whereas they were like, no, we're a punk band in our hearts, and punks sing about stuff that matters. It's not just, some of these songs you could say that are not as serious as that. They're more fun. But this is, and I thought about the this album with its themes of anxiety and sexuality and sort of disaffectedness, not necessarily angst. It's not, I don't think angst is the right word, but just feeling disconnected. And then you look at what the singles were from, like the first big single for the Offspring was Self-Esteem, which I don't remember hearing people sing about necessarily like a personal self-esteem. And that's when I'm talking about like Pearl Jam. Pearl Jam's lyrical content tended to be like stories about people, like Daughter or Jeremy, or they were about characters or people we're supposed to empathize with. Whereas Green Day and Offspring were saying, no, this is me. I have no self-esteem. I have anxiety, and it's coming through in my music. So I could see why this became the natural sort of next big thing after grunge, why pop punk exploded, because it was still addressing issues the way that grunge did, Nirvana in their way, and Pearl Jam and Soundgarden and Alice in Chains in their own ways. This seemed to make it more internal. It seemed to internalize those issues more, rather than
like, in some ways, some new metal did that too, right?
Yeah, exactly. You could see that same thing with new metal,
or at least played with the different angles of that.
I think that, we talked about new metal in our new metal roundtable. I think the difference is whether or not you find new metal fun musically.
Yes.
And this fun, like,
yep.
Even though there are some heavy themes and some issues being worked out, these are still fun, up-tempo, pop punk, catchy as hell songs. So,
yep.
What, if anything, does not work for you on this record?
I think I would boil it down to 38 minutes is great running length for this album. It's what you want from this type of music, the attitude, the energy, the concept, the sound of the band. On paper, time-wise, it's perfect. I would rather them cut the 15 songs, though, for me, makes it difficult to kind of remember the record and know where I'm at and what's coming next. Like, my brain can't hold 15 things in it. My brain can hold 8 to 10 things, maybe 12. And there's something like really special about classic records where you just know, like, first couple listens, like, you start to know, like, oh, this track, then this happens. And then, oh yeah, this song is at the beginning. And then this one's over here towards the end. Like, when I look at this, I'm like, wow, 15 tracks. Like, where's Basket Case at? And when I come around? Like, it's just too many songs. So I'd rather they use that 38 minutes. Shoot, take 40 if you want. Somewhere between 40 and 35 minutes. I'd rather them maybe add a minute, half a minute to a couple of these songs and show off the performance side of the band. Add a middle section, add an outro, maybe like add an extended chorus, write a couple bridges, like add a little bit more to some of the stronger songs and cut the weaker songs. Specifically, the way the record ends is kind of a fizzle. F.O.D. it's one of the longer songs on the record, almost 3 minutes, but I don't really think it deserves the 3 minutes of time. It's fine. And All By Myself is kind of a clunker. It's a charming little ending, I guess, but it's just a weird way to end the record where half of F.O.D is quiet, All By Myself is quiet. You just lose energy and I lose the orientation. So I would cut those songs. Maybe like Sassafras Roots or one of the other album tracks that are weaker, and just invest a little bit more in some of the stronger songs. Maybe make one of the album tracks a little bit more fun from a performance standpoint, or add a little something extra juice to a couple of the singles. I would just use the time a little bit differently. The only other thing I will say is, I think I remember this conversation at the time, but it stood out to me on re-listens was, he's kind of singing with a fake British accent. Sometimes it's okay and it helps with the melodies. Other times you're like, you're laying it on pretty heavy here, dude. That was the only other thing that stuck out. What you mean, mate?
You don't see it with fake British accent.
It's like you're from San Francisco. I'd like to hear a little bit more San Francisco come through on the vocal.
I agree with you. I even though it's only 14 official songs, 15 with the bonus, it does feel long. The weird thing is, I don't know if you notice this, when it kicks in F.O.D, the guitar tone sounds different than the rest of the record. It's like, I don't know if there's more gain or something, but it just sounds bigger, and it actually throws off the sound to me to the rest of the record.
It sounds like a pedal gain versus an amp gain.
Yeah. It's like you hit the heavy metal distortion pedal.
Yep.
So I agree with you. I think like you could drop Chump. You could drop Sassafras Roots. You could drop one of the minute long songs, and then extend some of those minute and a half long songs just a little bit. Just give me like one more chorus or something, and make this a, like, and I agree, F.O.D is not anything special. And you can keep the stupid hidden track, that's fine, but cut it down to like 11 songs, because then you're at like 34 minutes plus the bonus track, which isn't that long. It just, because again, it's a lot. There's a lot of energy pounding you over and over again. When I think back to those punk records that you're talking about, like, yeah, they're pretty concise, and even those have some filler. I mean, Nevermind the Bullocks is not a perfect record. It has some junk on it. It's fine.
Yeah.
Not everything is Holiday in the Sun and God Save the Queen on that album. We remember those songs. Even the Ramones, like the early Ramones records. Yes, there's like 10 songs and 6 of them are spectacular, and then you don't even remember what the other 4 are. So
you mentioned listening to this on vinyl. You've like got 8 songs on a side. Like, hey, that's like a whole album. It's not about length to me. It's just about like knowing where the songs are and anticipating where they are, remembering where they are. It just, from a song standpoint, like trying to get a little bit tighter and not as much about running length.
Yep. Hundo agree. So we don't need to talk about how this album did, because it's a Diamond album. It clearly did insane. And I'm still amazed that it sold half of the 10 million 5 to 20 years. I mean, it's probably still selling, is the crazy part. I haven't looked it up. I can look it up now. But like, if you go to Spotify, like the Basket Case has 1 billion streams. 1.136 billion streams.
Wow.
Welcome to Paradise, 208,000 streams. Longview, 153 million. When I Come Around, 570 million. The All By Myself has 13 million streams. That's the hidden track, a stupid hidden track written about masturbating by the drummer. And that has more streams than probably entire bands that have 10 albums, but have nobody listens to. And that's insane to me that it has done that. You know what other song has over 1 billion streams by them? American Idiot.
Yeah.
That's
Yep.
bonkers to me. I mean, they have like 10 songs with 500 million streams. Good Riddance, 734 million. Boulevard of Broken Dreams, 850 million. When I Come Around, 570 million. Wake Me Up When September Ends, 771 million. 21 Guns, 607 million. That's crazy. Those are crazy numbers. And they're making good pennies off of those numbers. I know. I mean, I'd be curious to know what their actual streaming revenue is. I mean, if you get 1 billion streams, you should be able to live off 1 billion streams, right?
That's probably it's probably $120.
You should be able to play your Apple TV bill every month with 1 billion streams.
I'm sure they do okay, but it's not nearly what it should be. Let's put it that way.
Right. So where do we land, Jay? Here's the question. We've talked about what we liked. We've talked about what didn't work. I'll share the poll results from our Patreon community in a moment. But where do we land on this Diamond album? Is it a worthy album, a better EP, or a decent single? And most importantly, has it stood the test of time? Like, is this something where when you've heard it now versus when you heard it then, you go, I'm not offended by this? Or it's actually gotten better? Where do you land?
I'm landing at a worthy album. I think it's gotten better. You know, When I Come Around is probably a song I don't want to necessarily ever hear again.
Yeah.
But something like She, which was less driven into my head, I really enjoyed. Again, I mean, going back to what worked, I think the performances were great. They still work for me. The songwriting is really top notch. And some of the power pop stuff on this really, I think, popped again for me. Like, I understand that genre better now than I did at the time. And I can hear, oh shit, okay, yeah, there's a Beatles influence here. And like Pulling Teeth, if you slowed that down, it could be a Weezer song, you know? So those aspects of the album work for me now, and I probably didn't perceive them at the time. So, you know, I think it offers something 30 years later, at least for me, that it didn't then. And it still works. It was a fun listen. How about you? Where'd you land?
Where the album, like you, I think I would trim it a little bit, maybe. And I also I never have to hear When I Come Around again.
Yeah.
I don't know why. It's a perfectly fine song, but I think it was just played so much.
There's something about the predictability of that riff and the way it's a little plotting. It's not as high energy. I don't know. It just annoys me.
The riff sounds very early to mid 90s, like dun, 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 like 4 chords. It's Bush, it's Nirvana.
Yeah.
It's that progression.
It's like generic alt rock.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
The only thing that really but the thing that's most interesting about it is the bass line, that he's not just playing simple bass notes. But that's not enough to make me want to listen to it over and over again.
But when I hear Longview start, I'm like, ooh, that bass line is so good. And those tom rolls and like, it's just, even though that song was played to death, when I hear it now, I'm like, oh, that's a cool groove. I'm not like, these 4 chords.
And I do think I have a greater appreciation for what went into this record in terms of their musical language that they were bringing into it, making it a little bit more than just a straight up punk record. Because I don't know that this would have, even though a lot of these songs are punk, the ones that are not, that stray from that, are what make the record to me a little bit more interesting. Because it's not a boom 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 like that sort of thing over and over again. That it's why, like this, while I greatly appreciate Bad Religion, the repetitiveness, I think sometimes of even though they have amazing vocals and lyrics, I think the repetitiveness, the repetitive downstrum that kind of thing just kind of wears on me faster than this album and its production and what Rob Cavallo was able to get out of them, which they ended up working with him for a number of records. And he became a huge name in the pop punk world after this because of his production on this album. So our community spoke. 84% were the album, 5% better EP, 11% decent single. So someone besides Ian voted decent single on this. It wasn't just Ian. Curious to know who also joins Ian in their dislike of Green Day. I don't know if that other person hates Green Day as much as Ian does. Ian has the passion of 10,000 suns when it comes to Green Day and his hatred. But you might just not be interested in this, and that's fine. Everybody's got their own thing. We hope that you've enjoyed this Diamond episode. There's more Diamond episodes to do, and honestly, we're getting towards the ones that I'm a little concerned about. Kid Rock's Devil Without a Cause, Creed's Human Clay. Those, I'm not necessarily looking forward to those if we get to them. I think there's a few other, like Jules' Pieces of You is a 10 million seller.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah. There's
some of them, like my barometers usually, do I remember more than 2 singles from an album? And if I do, then like, okay, that's probably a Diamond album. But Jewel, I don't know that I remember more than.
Who Will Save Your Soul? Yeah. You Were Meant for Me.
Yeah.
Those were the 2 off the top of my head.
Okay.
So we need to thank everybody who left comments, everybody who voted. If you would like to leave comments and vote, you can join us at dmounion.com or digmeoutunion.com to partake in the voting and chatting. Also, the chat happens when you join our union over at Discord. All sorts of stuff and talk happening there. It's where we talk about things like the Linkin Park new singer and reunion, or Nick Cave's tour of the United States, which is coming up in the spring, which I'll be honest, I'm like a mid-level Nick Cave fan. Like I'm not an obsessive Nick Cave fan. I just like listening to him every once in a while. Mm-hmm. But I've seen him live, like on Austin City Limits, and his performance is amazing. And they're playing a theater, so I can sit down. So I'm like, I think I'm going to go to that. Like, I wouldn't normally like go to a Nick Cave show, but like, hey, this is probably, one of the few opportunities. It's like when Suede and Manic Street Preachers toured. Like, I got to sit down. I got to sit and I have a nice view up high, and I didn't have to, worry about getting elbowed by teens.
Stand in the sun or
exactly.
Yeah. Get involved in a mosh pit for a show that shouldn't have a mosh pit.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Also at Patreon, you can vote in our monthly album review polls, and you get access to our box newsletter, which is at Substack. Newsletter comes out every week with new releases for 80s, 90s, and aughts relevant music, books, documentaries, etc. It's also where the 80s Metal Podcast resides, which comes out every other week. You can check that out in its own stream, or its own its own stream. It's different than the 90s Rock Podcast. You can leave positive feedback over at Apple Podcasts. Leave us 5 stars if you enjoy listening to this or to the 80s Metal Podcast. So for Jay, I'm Tim. We're out, and we'll be back next week with another episode of Dig Me Out.